Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. It's all about unlocking your potential. And I think personal growth is something we all think about.
Yeah, definitely.
We're going to be taking apart a podcast episode today that's just full of these practical strategies for personal growth. And I think what makes this one really stand out is they use a lot of like real life stories, so it makes it feel a lot more achievable. It's not just theory.
Yeah, those big personal development ideas can be kind of intimidating, but when you hear about how regular people have actually put them into practice and seen results, it makes it much more relatable.
Right, like it's one thing to read a self-help book, but it's another thing to hear somebody actually doing it.
Exactly.
So before we really jump into the how-tos, I think we should start with just defining like what exactly is personal development? What are we even talking about?
Right. Well, it's more than just like a trendy buzzword. This episode really emphasizes that it's an ongoing journey. It's about like self-discovery, growth, and, just recognizing that we're all works in progress, always evolving and learning.
It's not about being perfect, it's about making progress.
Exactly.
And speaking of progress, the episode gets into some really practical strategies, and one of the first things that they talk about is SMART goals. I feel like everybody's heard of SMART goals, but I think it's worth like revisiting why it's such a powerful concept.
Oh, totally. And this episode, I think, does a really good job of breaking down why they're so effective. And it really comes down to clarity and accountability.
Mm.
I think so many of us set goals that are just way too vague, like I want to be healthier or I want to be more successful. But how do you even begin to approach something like that?
Yeah.
And that's where SMART goals come in.
Yeah.
They force you to get specific. So, instead of just saying, I want to be healthier, a SMART goal would be like, I will exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes for the next month.
Yeah.
So you see how much more concrete and actionable that is.
Yeah, it's like you have a roadmap instead of just like a general direction.
Yeah.
But even with a roadmap, you need to keep track of your progress. You need to know if you're going in the right direction. And the episode had some pretty interesting ways to do that.
Yeah, they talk about a couple of different methods. And I think what's cool is they go beyond just the typical advice of use a digital tool, which, apps like Todoist and Notion are great for task management. But they also highlight journaling, which I think is a really powerful tool for personal growth that sometimes gets overlooked.
I can see how that would be helpful for self-reflection, but how does it actually help you like track your progress towards a goal?
That's a good question. It's not just about checking boxes in a journal. It's more about understanding the why behind your goals and how you're feeling along the way. You can use it to reflect on your experiences, what's motivating you, what challenges you're facing, and, even celebrate those small wins, which is so important.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like checking in with yourself and making sure you're still on the right track, not just going through the motions.
Yeah, I've done that before. And it's really cool when you go back and read old journal entries. You're like, wow, I was thinking about things so differently back then.
Exactly.
That's so true. Speaking of shifting your perspective, the episode also talks about this daily gratitude practice, which I'm a big fan of. What about you?
Well, me too. And it's such a simple habit to incorporate into your life, but it can have a pretty big impact. They suggest just writing down 3 things you're grateful for each morning, and, it takes 2 minutes. But it can really shift your mindset from focusing on what you lack to appreciating what you already have.
Yeah, I think it kind of reprograms your brain to focus on the positive, which I think is so important, especially when you're going through challenges.
Definitely.
Now, in a similar vein, they also touch on mindfulness and meditation. Have you had any experience with those?
I have, and they're really powerful. The episode emphasizes how, even a few minutes of just focused breathing or a guided meditation can help you manage stress so much better and gain so much more clarity. And I think in today's world, where we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation, creating those little pockets of stillness is so valuable.
I've tried meditation a few times, and it's amazing how just 5 minutes can just calm you down and recenter you, especially when things feel really chaotic.
Right.
Okay, so speaking of techniques that maybe sound a little out there, the episode also talks about the power of visualization, which I found pretty fascinating.
Yeah, they talk about creating a mental roadmap for your goals by actually visualizing yourself achieving them. And it might sound a little woo-woo, but think about it. Elite athletes have been using visualization for decades to mentally rehearse their performances. And there's more and more research that suggests that by vividly picturing yourself succeeding, you're actually priming your mind for success.
It's almost like you're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, exactly.
But, okay, let's be real for a second. Personal growth is not always a solo journey, right? I think we need other people,
Mhm.
and the episode talks about learning from others.
Definitely. And they recommend like seeking inspiration from books, podcasts, and even just observing successful people in your field. Like specifically, they mention Atomic Habits by James Clear,
Mm.
which is all about how those tiny changes can make a huge difference over time.
Oh, I love that book.
Yeah, that's a good one. And they also mentioned the Tim Ferriss show, where he interviews all sorts of people about their routines and their habits and how they've achieved success.
Right.
But the main point is like even if those specific resources don't resonate with you, it's about finding what works for you. Like we
Yeah.
all have different learning styles, so it's about finding those things that click for you and that you can draw inspiration from.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about the elephant in the room. Personal development isn't always easy, and the episode actually talks about some of those challenges that we all face, like self-doubt. That imposter syndrome can be a real struggle.
Oh yeah, and it's so refreshing to hear a podcast episode actually acknowledge these things. They're so universal. And the advice that they give is super practical. Like this is just journaling to kind of process those feelings
Hmm.
and then seeking feedback from people that you trust and, just surrounding yourself with a community that supports you.
Yeah, I think that last one's really important. Having people in your corner to remind you of your strengths when you're doubting yourself.
It's like having your own personal cheerleading squad.
Exactly. And another big challenge that they address is the fear of failure. I mean, we all experience that to some degree, but it can be so paralyzing. What do they have to say about that?
Well, they suggest trying to reframe failure as a learning opportunity.
Mm.
So instead of seeing it as this like huge setback,
Mm.
try to view it as valuable feedback.
Mm.
You tried something, it didn't work out exactly as planned,
Mm.
but what can you learn from that and how can you apply those lessons moving forward?
It's all about that growth mindset. Mistakes are just stepping stones. And they also talk about celebrating small wins, which I think is so important. What other obstacles do they cover?
Well, one that I think we can all relate to, procrastination.
Ugh, yes. We all know that feeling, right? You've got that mountain of tasks staring you down, and it's so tempting to just binge watch Netflix instead.
Exactly. And their advice is to break those tasks down into smaller, more manageable chunks. Because sometimes, when something feels too overwhelming, it's hard to even get started.
It's like you have to trick your brain into thinking it's not that bad.
Totally. And they also recommend setting deadlines and finding an accountability partner because sometimes having that external pressure or support can be really helpful.
Right. That's about figuring out what works for you, what helps you stay on track, and keeps you from getting bogged down.
Exactly.
And that, my friend, brings us to the end of part 1 of this deep dive. But don't go anywhere. We'll be back in part 2 to dive deeper into some of those listener interactions and personal stories that the episode highlights.
I can't wait. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive. One thing that makes this particular podcast episode really cool is the way they weave in these real-life stories from listeners. And in this part, we're going to explore some of those listener interactions and how these concepts actually play out in real life.
It's so inspiring to hear how people are applying these strategies
Yeah,
to their own situations. It's kind of like proof that this stuff actually works. It's not just theory.
totally. And one of the stories that really resonated with me was about this listener named Sarah. She was talking about how she was struggling with time management, which is something I think a lot of us can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like trying to balance work, studying, and still have some kind of a personal life. It's tough.
Right. It's like there are not enough hours in the day.
Yeah.
And she was feeling super overwhelmed until she discovered this thing called time blocking. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, time blocking is amazing. It's about like being really intentional with your time. So instead of just having this like never-ending to-do list, you actually block out specific times in your day for certain tasks, like
Mm.
work, studying, errands, even just like relaxation time.
So it's like creating a schedule for your day, but like more details.
Exactly. It's about creating boundaries for your time so that things don't just bleed into each other. And for Sarah, it made a huge difference. She was getting so much more done, and she felt way less stressed.
Makes so much sense. It's like you're giving each part of your life its own designated space.
Totally.
Another listener, Tom, talked about how he was dealing with self-doubt after making a big career change. I bet that can be really tough, like starting something new and feeling like you don't belong.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like that imposter syndrome can hit you hard in those situations.
Right. And he was really struggling with those feelings, like he wasn't qualified enough or, good enough to be in this new role. But then he joined a networking group, and that seemed to make a big difference for him. What do you think it was about that experience that helped him?
I think it was about finding that community of support,
Yeah.
you know. connecting with other people who were in similar situations who understood what he was going through. Like they could share advice, offer encouragement, and just remind him that he wasn't alone in those feelings.
I think that's so important, you know? We don't have to go through this alone. Sometimes just talking to other people and realizing that they're going through the same stuff can be so reassuring.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
like having a safety net.
Now, another story that they shared was about Mia and her experience with meditation. She said she was a bit skeptical at first, but she decided to give it a try and started with just like 5 minutes a day. I'm curious, like, did that really make a difference? 5 minutes seems so short.
You'd be surprised. I mean, even those few minutes of just focused breathing can have a huge impact. Mia found that it really helped her with her mental clarity and her stress levels. And I think that's a great example of how sometimes the smallest actions can make a big difference if you do them consistently.
I love that it's like those little things can really add up over time. And what I think is so cool about all of these listeners' stories is that they really show that personal development is not this like one-time thing. You know, it's not like you reach a certain point and then you're done. It's an ongoing process.
Right. It's about constantly learning and adapting and growing. And, I think these listeners are a great example of that. They faced challenges, they found solutions, and then they shared their experiences to inspire others. It's like this beautiful cycle of growth and support.
I love that. And you know what's really cool is that the episode encourages listeners to share their own personal development tips and experiences too. And they talk about how everyone has something valuable to offer. I think that's such a cool idea. What do you think?
I totally agree. I think it's so important to create that sense of community and realize that we can all learn from each other, whether it's, successes or even failures.
Hmm.
There's always something to be gained from sharing our experiences.
It's like we're all in this together,
That's
right? And that brings us to the final part of our deep dive. We're going to take some time to reflect on the key takeaways from this episode and talk about, what this all means for you, the listener.
Should be good.
All right, so welcome back to the final part of this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground from strategies to stories to challenges, so much good stuff.
Yeah, so much.
So in this last part, let's bring it all together, and think about like, what are the big takeaways that we really want people to walk away with? What did we learn?
Yeah, good question. I think one thing that kept coming up over and over again in the episode was self-awareness.
Right.
And it might sound kind of basic, but it really is the foundation of everything. Like if you don't understand your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, your goals, then how can you possibly make good decisions about your life?
It's like you're going on a trip without a map. You're just wandering around.
Exactly. You got to know where you are and where you want to go.
Yeah.
But once you have that roadmap, then it's all about action, right?
Okay.
But I think what's cool about this episode is they emphasize that it doesn't have to be these huge, overwhelming changes. It's really about those small, consistent actions that you take over time.
Those baby steps.
Yeah, those baby steps. It's like the compound effect they talk about,
Mm-hmm.
Little things add up. And, it's okay to mess up along the way. Setbacks happen, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But what matters is how you respond to them.
You got to keep going. And I think they make a really good point about celebrating those small wins.
Oh, definitely.
Like those little victories can really keep you motivated.
This is true.
And let's not forget support. I mean, having people in your corner, whether it's friends, family, a mentor, can make such a difference.
It's huge. Like it's a reminder that you're not alone on this journey. And just being able to share your experiences with others, your challenges, your successes, it can be really powerful.
I think so too. And it's almost like they become your accountability partners in a way.
Right. Like your own personal cheerleading squad.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it'd be great to leave people with something to think about, something actionable, Like what's one small step that you can take today to move closer to your goals?
Yeah, I love that. Like what's one thing you can do right now to make a difference?
It could be anything. Like, setting aside 5 minutes to do a meditation or write down 3 things you're grateful for, or maybe pick out a book or a podcast that inspires you, or even just reach out to a friend or a mentor and ask for some support.
All of those are great ideas. And I think the most important thing is just to remember that personal development is a journey. It's not a destination. It's something that you're always working on.
Always learning, always growing.
Exactly. So keep striving to unlock your full potential.
That's such good advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into personal development. We hope you found it helpful and inspiring. And until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep unlocking your potential.